like Freudian theory, which objectifies sexuality. So all of the things that are applied to the stories of women in modern English scholarship, Western scholarship, I would say, is not original understanding of the feminine as it is represented in Hindu texts. It's actually a colonial or colonized understanding. So the subject of feminine, divine feminine, as well as heroic feminine is fascinating. Naturally, stories of femininity from classical texts of India attracted scholarly attention in the West. There are numerous trends that commonly dominate this, but I won't go to detail about every one of them. I would just note a few aspects of these trends. So the first one is overemphasis on female sexuality, objectification of the subject.
I welcome all of you. Sangam Talks welcomes you warmly as well. Today, we will be talking about a very important topic. Like I said, it is going to cover something that is important and something that is very similar to the capacity of what Ramcharitmanas did in its time. It was based on Ramayana, and that was because it wanted to reignite and rekindle what was being lost in terms of religious awareness in our country, because we were undergoing invasions, we were undergoing conversions, we were undergoing all sorts of attacks. Feminine Journeys of Mahabharata is a book which combines history, text, religion, and practice to arrive at a comprehensive understanding of the history of Hindu women, explores the Mahabharata in relation to gender norms, and provides perspective for understanding the legacy of Hindu women in modern society. And I am to believe that this book is the Ramcharitmanas of its own time, to understand and relearn the learnings of Mahabharata. And for that, we have the author and our speaker today, Dr. Lavanya Vemsani, who is a multi-award winning scholar and distinguished university professor of history at Shawnee State University, honorary visiting professor at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, in the Department of Historical Studies, and awarded Fulbright Global Fellow. She served as president of Ohio Academy of History. She is the author of 5 books and numerous articles. I welcome you yet again, ma'am. Thank you. And
thank you, Ojasvi. Namaste, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Sangam Talks, and my host here. Thank you, Ojasvi. I am flattered you compared my work on the Mahabharata with Ramcharitmanas. It's not, but I understand your idea behind that comparison. You're trying to bring out the colonial aspect of our clouding understanding of our classical texts, as well as colonized minds, which forgotten the actual understanding of our texts and what our texts preserve. Most of the understanding about feminine divine and feminine heroic, our leaders, is hidden behind these modern layers of reinterpretation and colonized interpretations and imposing modern Western normative thoughts. And it's important for us to go back, read them again, and understand the original stories, original concepts behind our goddesses, the feminine divine, and the feminine heroic, our leaders. Just the other day, I have seen a woman, to boot that, comparing a male leader and a female leader, both of them very similar age. She was calling the woman old, and derogatively referring to her, but not the male. The male, of course, is held in high regard. So this type of stereotypical understanding of female, feminine leaders and feminine heroic and goddesses still prevalent in our modern society. So it's very important, especially Hinduism was reinterpreted, studied under colonial administrations Most of the original meanings were lost. So it's important for us to bring them back, deconstruct the colonized thoughts, and bring back the original understanding of female, the goddesses, as well as our leaders from the Mahabharata, so that the future understanding or continuation is not clouded. It's very important for us to find the original meaning. So for this, I chose the Mahabharata. Stories of feminine divine and feminine heroic abound in the Mahabharata. Numerous women ventured out of their normative roles to endure hardships and achieve the extraordinary. Sometimes the feminine leaders are banished from their natural world of living into another world, as noted in the case of Ganga and Urvashi, and sometimes banished from their kingdoms into the forest. For example, Draupadi, and sometimes they undertook the journey voluntarily into the forest with their partners, to be with their partners and children to be supportive. For example, Kunti, Damayanti, and Savitri. The only exception to this exile being a major part of life is Shakuntala and Satyavati. Sadly, their exile is also the result of their abandonment at birth. So instead of undertaking exile later in life, they actually begin their life with abandonment and exile. So Shakuntala and Satyavati's life is even more harder. Of course, it's even more harder in the case of Amba. Under extraordinary pain, this exile leads one into journey through forest and multiple lives and genders, as in the case of Amba. Amba's story provides an opportunity to go beyond the dichotomy of male and female genders to examine gender transformation and classical Indian views on gender. Almost every one of these feminine heroics or feminine divine traveled through numerous travails. Their extraordinary life is very difficult, accomplishing superhuman feats at times, seen in almost every life of the feminine we study here. That might be the reason for their stories being imprinted in the popular memory. They endure. The stories of many of these feminine leaders extend beyond the literary texts, imprinting on the popular imagination and practice through the regular performance of folk storytelling. For example, the Andhra Telugu region that I come from, Telugu and Karnataka region, they have Yakshagana, Burrakatha, Jatra, Leelas, etc. Of course, classical theater in other places also have a rich culture of bringing to life the stories of these feminine heroics and feminine divine. So Satra, Kuchipudi, Mohiniyattam, Bharatanatyam, Odissi, all of them have important compendium about them. And festivals, numerous festivals celebrate and worship dedicated to Draupadi, Savitri, and Damayanti. So for women, their journey is destiny. It's not the end. So it marks their extraordinary achievements. The many journeys of feminine heroics and feminine divine reveal powerful and multifaceted personalities of the feminine heroics. Each story provides a formidable demonstration of the female power in all its multiple aspects, including gender questions. Over the millennia, as the female leaders of the Mahabharata imprint on the memory of the countless millions of followers in India, regardless of gender, numerous creative works were also created, and festivals recollect their stories each and every year. Annual festivals are also distinguished by theater celebration, as in the case of Draupadi. Women's participation and vows of austerities with the goal of attaining purity as well as worldly success forms the core of devotees celebrating feminine divine. So one of the most important features noticed in these stories of the women is that they had the freedom to choose their path, contrary to the previously held notions. Education seems to have been available to them regardless of their status. As Satyavati, with her background of belonging to a fisherman family, seems to be decently educated as others with more affluent background. The women also had awareness about the ashramas and chose their sannyasa, the final stage of life, when they thought it appropriate. It was also held falsely that women were not allowed to follow the ashramas, the 4 ashramas. But these examples show us they followed the 4 ashramas and also chose sannyasa at a later stage in life after meeting, all the familial aspects of their life. So for this study, my present study in the book, I used Mahabharata. Mahabharata is the main text on which all the stories and examination is based. But in addition to that, I also used literary texts and regional compositions. The Telugu Mahabharatam is used whenever necessary. And Kalidasa's literary works, Abhignana Sakuntalam and Vikramorashiyam was also consulted. Bhasa's Karnabara and Tagore's Kunti Karna and are also used. And Aurobindo's Savitri is examined when I was examining the Mahabharata story. The meaning of Mahabharata story of Savitri is not complete unless we examine Aurobindo's Savitri. Aurobindo actually brings out the true meaning of the journey of Savitri as that of a soul's journey through the stages of yoga, which is actually found in Mandukya Upanishad. Mandukya Upanishad actually explains the 3 stages of yoga and enlightenment that is actually represented perspectively in Savitri's story. And Aurobindo brings out this meaning through his examination, through his composition of Savitri, epic Savitri. So what do we have up to this point? What do we have in the Western understanding, English scholarship, I would say, on the feminine? What did they present? What did they say about the feminine? They actually tried to label them, tried to say their thinking is not their thinking. They were trying to talk like men, or it was men's understanding that was put in women's words. Or they also tried to apply modern theories like Freudian theory, which objectifies sexuality. So all of the things that are applied to the stories of women in modern English scholarship, Western scholarship, I would say, is not original understanding of the feminine as it is represented in Hindu texts. It's actually a colonial or colonized understanding. So the subject of feminine, divine feminine, as well as heroic feminine is fascinating. Naturally, stories of femininity from classical texts of India attracted scholarly attention in the West. There are numerous trends that commonly dominate this, but I won't go to detail about every one of them. I would just note a few aspects of these trends. So the first one is overemphasis on female sexuality, objectification of the subject. Second one is categorizations and labeling. It goes a step further from this overemphasis on sexuality. And the third one is applying modern European theoretical frameworks that takes it even further. First, it overemphasizes, the trends overemphasize female sexuality. Then they are categorized as, good women, bad women, wild women, wild goddesses, or spouse goddesses, or, there are also the other derogatory terms. And then, of course, finally, the Freudian theories or all these sexuality theories are applied, which are not suitable to understanding texts that are handed down from 3,000 years ago. So it might have happened even older than that. So excessive focus on women's sexuality and gendered analysis of female narratives resulted in partisan understanding of the feminine heroics of the Mahabharata. This also resulted in examining narratives of only those feminine that are considered out of the normal style of marriage, such as Draupadi, Kunti, and Urvashi. So there are numerous works on these women and not much in other women. So in their quest to find legitimacy for expression of what is considered proper womanhood in relation to the men in their life, excessive attention had been paid to women's sexuality, ignoring all other aspects of women's life. The partisan understanding of women's tales resulted in them being treated as puzzles, are their activities and presentations discounted as anomalies rather than normative. The women are categorized as either sexually aggressive or submissive, dismissing other aspects of their life. The scholarly examination of classical texts treated the study of women's stories as solving a puzzle frequently. For example, the Vedic hymns of Ashwamedha contain the names Amba and Ambika and Ambalika. So they actually thought it is symbolic of the Mahabharata and the feminine heroics, the two mothers and of course Amba, who went on her journey. But they only use the stories of Amba and Ambalika to solve this puzzle, but not Amba. Ambika and Ambalika are used as, demonstrating Ashwamedha, but not Amba. Of course, Amba left and she took her own journey, right? What about that? That breaks the symbol that they're trying to derive from this Vedic hymn, right? But it's ignored because they want to prove what they imagine, not actually what is shown here. Women's activities and expression of independent thoughts is discounted in favor of relegating them to the background. Male perspectives discounted the value of women's dialogue. Many men and following them, many women also analyzed it like this. The women's dialogues, women's arguments that are found in the Mahabharata, they called them as non-womanly or non-typical female argument by categorizing most of women's expressions as apadharma, not as typical of the women. It is also said that they might not be as smart to frame arguments on their own, but borrowed the ideas from listening to men in silent proximity of being listeners. So they're trying to discount women's education. And on top of that, they're also trying to discount women's independent thinking, women's mind. So they might not have that much of higher level of thinking, that much of higher level of argumentation, dialogues to begin with. That was their argument. Intellectual debates embedded in Draupadi and Shakuntala stories, which depict the female protagonists questioning the authority, are ruled out as examples of apadharma, are something they learned from listening to other men. So their leadership is never accepted, never considered their own thinking or their own mind. So another trend that commonly dominated the academic study of feminine is the categorization and labeling applied to the women. So the first thing is to discount women's knowledge and women's mind. And the second thing is to label them derogatively. These scholars have spent much time and ink on discussing categorization of goddesses into distinct categories, sometimes even going to the extent of coining very derogatory names for such invented categories. There is a dichotomy imposed. Some of the terminology, such as tooth goddess, breast goddess, or wild goddess, or spouse goddess, are applied to these categorizations, which makes obvious the deep-seated sexist interpretation of heroic or divine feminine, as these categories are based on evaluating and labeling women's status or case categories based on their relationship to men. Even female scholars followed this trend, either unknowingly or knowingly. This categorization remained prevalent in almost all the work produced on Indian classical texts, especially the stories of goddesses until recently. However, these trends are being recognized and being questioned. They're not discounted or discontinued yet, but they're being questioned. So why can't the woman, feminine divine or feminine heroic, be studied as holistic person representing multiple aspects of her life? Why is her relationship to a male as a mother or a wife central to her characteristic, defining her? So are these female goddesses only spouses or mothers? They don't mean anything else? Or does this betray overarching prevalent male perspective, even a bit misogyny? So the futility of this partisan categorization becomes obvious in the light of examination of female heroic personalities and goddesses of Mahabharata. The division between the terrifying and familial aspects of feminine is always highlighted. For example, Ganga, regarded as the mother of all, is also associated with death. Subhadra, known as the most domiciled goddess, is also associated with blood, death, and sacrifice in her association and identification with goddess Ekanamsa and Nitra. Some scholars even thought it pertinent to take these categorizations out of context of religion to formate a commentary on the larger Indian society of 20th century, providing continuous support to this initial misogynistic colonialist Western perspectives of Indian society. They formulated marriage as domiciling and Hinduizing the wild goddesses. Some have gone further to even formulate a theory that Shankaracharya had somehow accomplished the task of taking wild goddesses to traditionalize non-traditional goddesses to Hinduism, as if the practice of Hinduism differs from whatever they're trying to say. It appears that the natural course of historical evolution and cultural change reflected in the female worship is not understandable to these works. Any living thing is subject to change, and so is also common with living religion of Hinduism. For example, the representation of the goddess Ganga studied through sculptural representations across India and Southeast Asia demonstrate numerous innovations based on the place and time, which doesn't mean that Ganga is Hindu goddess sometimes and non-Hindu goddess sometimes, as some of them interpret. So a close study of the heroic women of the Mahabharata reveals that the sexuality of females hadn't been the concern of either the Mahabharata or the larger society at all, as most sexuality is reported as a matter of fact without any commentary. Sexual behavior of females is concern of modern scholarship rather than the classical Indian society in the age of the Ramayana or Mahabharata. The sexuality and marital lives of Draupadi, Urvashi, Savitri, Kunti, as well as gender ambiguity of Amba are discussed in detail without censure, which proves the larger society's openness as well as acceptance of differing sexuality. Therefore, I stayed away from these categorizations. And of course, I don't think they appropriately represent the women's lives. So another major issue with these modern scholarly studies is application of theories, Western European theories, often developed with a view of study of modern Western nuclear families, not applicable to the larger extended family system of India, especially to the Mahabharata times and Ramayana times. But regardless, they still apply. It is possible that examination of women's stories as part of overarching theoretical perspectives may have contributed to slanted understanding of powerful roles of women. We must remember that the feminine leaders whose stories were memorized and recollected in the epic tales lived their lives according to their own conviction and opportunities accorded to them in ancient India, rather than applying these modern psychoanalytical theories. They're not living their life to prove or show the modern psychoanalytical theories. Their lives actually demonstrate the yogic and understanding of life and enlightenment as seen in Draupadi's story and Savitri's, rather than modern psychoanalytical theories. The psychoanalytical theories actually fall short of understanding these actual journeys of female heroics and female goddesses of the Mahabharata. Sometimes, in the absence of straightforward evidence for applying Freudian psychoanalytics, they proposed that it should be applied widely rather than as it is seen in Eurocentric nuclear family on which this theory is based. So that the lengths to which these scholars go, even taking it out of context to apply, is unimaginable. Perhaps it might serve the academic examination well at this point if it is realized from this clear analysis that Freudian psychoanalytics or some such modern theories are not applicable to the stories of Mahabharata. If it is required one to give up the most basic premise of that theory, the nuclear family or Western European understanding of family. So they don't apply. That is the truth. We must remember that characters, especially the feminine heroics, acted in the way that was conducive to them under the circumstances available to them. And they were not living in 20th century world. They were living in a society that was 5,000 or 4,000 years ago. They're not modeling a scientific theory through their life, but the earlier understanding of enlightenment and yoga and Hindu understanding of life. So I veered away from applying any such theories to my analysis of feminine leaders' tales studied in this book. It is my conviction that studying women's stories for who they are and how they conducted themselves under the unique circumstances under which they lived, as depicted in the stories, would be much more fruitful to understand the woman rather than applying some unsuitable theories. Due to the prevalent trends in the examination, as noted here, the three trends, the study of feminine divine and feminine heroics of the Mahabharata has missed the discerning eye of the researchers. Most of the studies were devoted to the study of understanding women in their traditional roles, in their domestic sphere in relation to the men, or imitating men, not seen as independent lives. So this book provides a unique opportunity to open up a new discussion in deviance, where the stories and symbols designate the status of women from out of the ordinary. All the women examined in this book lived an extraordinary life, riddled with troubles and travails, which brings out the heroic nature of the women, hence helps us understand the exceptional life and choices and leadership qualities of the feminine and their lasting legacy. One of the important aspects of the life of the women studied in this book, as I already noted, is exile. Exile, forest, and isolating journeys are part of the stories utilized for analysis in this book. Exile in a forest or unknown place had been constantly noted in the lives of heroes of the Indian classics. Such heroic tales of men were also studied and analyzed carefully. While the narratives of women, their heroic journeys, frequently went unnoticed or misinterpreted. The heroic women of Indian classical texts, although follow a similar pattern as the hero's journey, eschew different values and traversed different ways, but they missed the discerning eye. Even though the forest setting of exile can be seen as a major event in their life, their conduct is different from that of men, and it's typically feminine. The forest setting had given the feminine a choice to dawn on a new identity and assume new responsibilities, perform tasks that they have not performed previously. So this brings out the extraordinary qualities of the feminine of the Mahabharata. For convenience of analysis and examination, each of the heroic tale is divided uniformly into 5 stages. The women's life has to be analyzed as a comprehensive journey, not as out of context stages or out of context events. So the 5 parts of the life are examined and analyzed depending on their complexity. Heroic stories of feminine heroic examined in this book are divided into 5 stages, which will be examined in detail in each chapter. So each chapter has these 5 stages. So the introduction and final stage are already there, but the birth and the journey, the life's journey and final stage are all important. So the life stage actually has the beginning and then exile and her emerging out as a heroic. So I examine lives of 11 heroic women of the Mahabharata, including Draupadi, Damayanti, and Savitri. I also examine additional textual sources available to examine the historical development of these narratives. For example, the story of Shakuntala is originally found in the Mahabharata, but Kalidasa's Abhignana Shakuntalam was responsible for bringing it closer to popular audience. Hence, I examine both versions of her story. Similarly, I examine multiple stories of Damayanti and Savitri. So there is no question, the stories of men and women in the 2 Indian epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, depict human suffering as well as human success. However, it is untenable that men's stories are seen as that of conquest and victory, while that of women's are seen as suffering and loss, which could not be a reflection of the fact. This is because the lack of employing distinct parameters to evaluate the understanding of women for their merit have not been developed, and male perspectives are always utilized without concern for authenticity to examine the women's stories from the classical texts. As we noted, dividing the feminine into tooth goddesses or wild goddesses or spouse goddesses, mother goddesses, and applying Freudian theories, of course, show the male perspective of understanding, not female understanding. So it's necessary to employ the cultural symbolism connected with women in order to understand the true nature of women in these classical stories. So in the case of women, when the narratives are examined, one should be cautious to employ different parameters. Hence, the stories of women, one should not look to the return or end of the journey, but the journey itself as a significant event to understand the heroic efforts and cultural depictions of the women. Therefore, embarking on the adventure of the journey itself is an achievement, not the return. Emphasis should be on the process of the journey rather than the return. Therefore, the present book focuses on analyzing the journey of the feminine divine and feminine heroic. The impeccable journeys of 11 feminine leaders that are examined in this book, all of them show a distinct path and extraordinary achievements. It's easy to fall into the trap of finding similarities between the many feminine journey studies in this book to develop an archetype or overarching commonalities. However, that might fall short of highlighting the unique features of each journey. So I desisted from compiling into one type or analyzing them into archetypes. So what are central features of the female heroic? Is there an archetype? But each of the feminine leaders is so unique that fitting them into one archetypical framework denies them the individual choice and extraordinary journey. That is not to overrule the utility of frameworks and overarching typical types. However, I do not recommend using that type of frameworks in this case because each of the journey is so unique. The feminine heroics are absolutely necessary for the narratives discussed in the book. They need to be seen as heroics, need to be seen in their own right. Their journey was most impactful part of the story. The male characters would not have found their return without the support of their feminine counterparts. For example, the Mahabharata cannot be imagined without Draupadi. So also, the Nalopakyana cannot be imagined without Damayanti. The Savitri story, the Satyavan story cannot be imagined without Savitri. Similarly, Madhavi, Satyavati, Kunti, Amba provides impactful journeys of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata would not be Mahabharata without their journeys. Each feminine leader is unique in her own personality and journey. So the book focused on the stories of 11 feminine leaders, paying attention to their own actions rather than that of others connected with them. Superwoman or Wonder Woman are modern adventure heroines, but our classical heroines are no less adventurous. Some have traveled to forests while others have transformed themselves. They always expressed what they desired. They were not afraid to stand up to authority, to question what they believed was right. Examples are abounding in the Mahabharata. Female agency and choice is always seen in all the stories. Without exception, there is no exception to this. Without exception, all the women studied in this book demonstrated remarkable female agency and choice. Beginning with the second chapter, the matriarch Satyavati, to final chapter with Urvashi, each woman stood firm in her convictions and laid down conditions to their approaching male partners and stood by them in adversity. Satyavati possessed sharp acumen and accosted by sage Agastya as a young adult. Still, she was smart enough to lay her rules. So the journeys of Kunti, Draupadi, Damayanti are the result of their husbands' instinctive actions, but their journeys actually demonstrate their thoughtful actions. However, this brings forward the strength and courage of women. In the case of Nala, it is clear that Damayanti's courage and sharp wit brought them back to their original life. Kunti agreed to invite celestials only after Pandu begged her with folded hands. Draupadi was the most independent of the women examined in this book. She took all her decisions under extreme duress, but proved accurate and demonstrated her understanding of dharma and her strength under struggles. Draupadi only forgave Jayadratha, Dushala's husband, after Yudhishthira pleaded with her. Madhavi's story demonstrates the female choice and strength. She followed Galava upon her father's request. Galava married her off 4 times to 4 different persons in his quest to meet his requirement of 800 white horses with a black ear. Madhavi fulfilled the promise that her father gave. But when faced with Swayamvara, she chose to exit the civilization in favor of strict asceticism, choosing to live as a doe. Madhavi is the greatest example of self-choice and courageous woman, difficult to understand under the prevalent norms of society. But she demonstrates the ultimate female agency and choice. Only a social structure that places women at the center could understand Madhavi's choice and independence. Damayanti is the most important heroic leader for the demonstration of female agency and choice. From choosing her partner to finally rescuing from the clutches of the invisible enemy, she demonstrates the strength and veracity of a woman, along with her unwavering commitment to her chosen partner. Savitri is the brightest star among the women examined in this book. She walked her path alone with her great integrity. She traveled to the Tirthas to choose her husband independently. Once she chose Satyavan, she learned the fact of his impending death in a year. However, that fact did not deter her. but only cautioned her on what to expect shows her strength. She prepared the whole year to face the impending day and faced the god of death. Yama, she returned with success. Facing Yama shows her strength. Her yogic enlightenment actually demonstrates what was noted in the Mandukya Upanishad. This is also examined and represented in Aurobindo Savitri. Subhadra is the incarnation of Nidra, goddess of states of mind. She is the sleep. Like the states of mind, which are varied, the actions of this goddess are multiple and varied. Goddess Nidra incarnated twice among the Yadavas. She incarnated first as the daughter of Yashoda, called Ekanamsa. In the second incarnation, she is born as Subhadra, married to Arjuna. She walks on the path of life and death with equality in her male partners and collaborators. Amba is the most unique female leader studied in this book, refusing to accept the fate thrust upon her forcefully by Bhishma. She undertook numerous ascetic practices until her wish to kill Bhishma was given to her. In her next life, she was born as a female Shikandi with the boon of becoming a male later. So she was raised as a male by her parents on the instructions of Shiva. She changed her gender with the help of a yaksha to become a male soon after her marriage. She was accepted as a male and participated in the Mahabharata war, killing Bhishma in the end. The one who never accepted his gender change, considering as a woman. This appropriately ends the story of Shikandi, an achievement in two ways. First, Shikandi killed Bhishma, and second, it also established the death of the male perspective that did not recognize him as a male. Ganga is a unique feminine representation, erasing the lines between three worlds and physical appearances, representing water and womanhood and divinity. She is unique in her aspects, all her aspects, and walks confidently in her convictions. Shakuntala, she appears innocent. She stole the hearts of millions with her innocence. However, she demonstrated her independence and choice when King Dushyanta approached her and when he did not accept her in the assembly. Urvashi had only two rules, one of which demonstrated her love for her pet lambs and defined the relationship with Pururavas. As long as he demonstrated his commitment through following her conditions, she stayed loyal to him, of course, and she leaves him when he doesn't. The journey is the triumph and not the return. So in the case of women, as we noted here, the journey is the indicator of strength and triumph of the woman rather than the return and end of the journey. The stories need to be read for their path and journey rather than for the return and end of the journey. Each woman uniquely displayed female agency and courage facing challenges. The most arduous challenge each of the feminine leaders faced, the most unique their journey was. Exile is the most common feature. Sometimes it might be into the forest, sometimes it might be from another world to earth. So all of the stories, the feminine stories studied in this book help us understand, learn the strength and understanding and convictions of feminine in the journeys to the Mahabharata, depicted in the Mahabharata. So thank you so much.
Namaste, Lavanya ji. Thank you for the good talk. I wondered whether you could give any examples of how they used our characters from our history to depict them in a psychoanalytical framework, like maybe 2 or 3 characters, maybe small incidents, so that I can get a sense of how they were misrepresented using Freudian theory. Thank you.
I don't want to go into the polemics of their theories. I already told you they are useless to understand our feminine leaders, but you can read. They are available everywhere. I don't want to go into details of what they say. It's for you to read. I think they are not applicable. They're useless to understand our heroics. They're applied to every heroic feminine that you can find.
Excellent talk. I'm from, Udupi, Mangalore area, so I understand when you're talking about the Yakshagana and things like that. So one or two questions. You mentioned the namesake about 10, 11, famous heroines in our Puranas and the epics. But you have left out Ahalya, Renuka, and Tara. So their travails or their role, how would you, especially Ahalya and Renuka? Tara is, of course, Panchakanyas Paranityam Mahapatakanasam. That's what our Prabha, that Stotra talks about. So my request is you can comment on that. Secondly, I got one more question. The other day, I read a news item in The Hindu that there are 40,000 teenage pregnancies in India. So some very unfortunate thing is happening in Indian society. And also in the Supreme Court, a case is being very strongly fought for recognition of same-sex marriages. And The Hindu, one of the most popular newspapers, reputed, dignified once upon a time, not now anymore, very strongly coming out and arguing in favor of same-sex marriages. So in the context of Kunti, the teenage pregnancy, and you talked about Satyavati, other, so how do we save our society now? Because government is also enhancing the age of marriage from 18 to 21 for women, females also. So I read in Hindu 100 years ago, the Indian society debated whether age should be raised beyond 16. That cutting is there with me. But today we are talking about 21 years. At the same time, teenage pregnancy. So I don't know how to frame this. I am concerned I'm an elderly person, I'm concerned. That's what I wanted you to, as a female lady writer and thinker, you can comment on these two aspects.
Okay, thank you. That was a great question. I haven't examined Ahalya and Renuka because this is not an examination. Their stories are very short in the Mahabharata. Their stories, of course, are in detail in the Puranas, not in the Ramayana also. The Ramayana also gives very short reference. Mahabharata also very short reference to their stories. They're actually much more colorful in the popular imagination than actually the Purana references. Anyway, my reason for not including them is their stories are not discussed fully or in details as you see in popular imagination in the Mahabharata. So I chose the central stories that are fully discussed in the Mahabharata. So that was my reason. I don't have anything against the other stories. I would do them in the future when I get a chance. So I will discuss the Puranas and other female stories and their place in the society later on. And as you talked about same-sex marriage, my stand is a little bit different here, maybe unpopular opinion. But life is different, gender is different, and according to Hinduism, we actually accepted different aspects of gender. Gender is not just binary for us. That's what is the Amba story also. We accepted transitions, gender transition, and we also accepted different representations of gender also. So for us, the soul is important. The soul has no gender, and the body might have different expressions of gender. So if you're following classical Hinduism, classical Hindu understanding of Hinduism, for us, the gender expression and marriage should not matter. That should be part of life. to anyone, to their desire and to their life suitable for them. So for us, it's not a concern. The concern was actually imposed on us from the Western society and Western penal code. It's not a crime in our society. Hindu society never criminalized various expressions of gender and sexuality. So that is there. And the next question that you have come up is about the concern for teenage pregnancies. The concern for teenage pregnancies is always there. Of course, the Mahabharata also has teenage pregnancies, as you mentioned. So we might have the strictest of the rules, strictest of the society, strictest of the family system. But there will be teenage pregnancies. There will be some things happening. That is part of society. You know, there are societal rules. Of course, there is also sometimes, you know, there's some fallout from these rules. I don't know. I'm not really sure of these statistics. One of our friends has conducted a recent study on Indian Statistical Society and also on Indian Sample Survey. And she found that they're still using these older parameters, which doesn't really bring out accurate statistics. So I would leave that aside. But this is something the society has to deal with. All societies have to deal with it. And we have to find our own way of dealing with the societal fallout. And raising the age of marriage, I think is a good thing because Indian society, Hindu society always understood marriage as something that happens between the adults. Of course, you have the Vedas also to see this, you know, both females and males undergo education, have the development of mind, development of body, and then they marry. Grihastha is the stage of life that one enters after their mind and body has developed. So marriage after 20, of course, we're going back to our Vedic understanding of life. So it's good for us. So I fully support raising the marriageable age. So thank you so much. That's a great question.
I am saying the very edifice of Hindu society, that is the family, it is under attack. This is how I look at it, because I'm in, you know, rural area, I'm in towns and I'm in cities. I lived in Delhi, I lived in Bangalore. Now I live in some small town. So the society is crumbling. This is what I'm saying. So marriage, family is the foundation. It is under attack. That's how I look at it. I don't know. This is when you are saying society has to deal with it, and eminent writers like you support 21 years and above, and that will lead to, you know, same-sex living in relations, and then pregnancies, abortions, and the female's life is ruined, completely ruined. The family is ruined. Recently, I came across a father committed suicide. When he came to know about his, you know, this happened to his daughter. I don't know. This is my reaction. But I also don't know what to do. I speak on this whenever I get an opportunity, wherever, maybe in social gatherings, schools. On 15th, I'm going to a, you know, college, you know. So I'm going to speak on these issues and call upon youngsters. Don't go by all those, whatever you see in these serials and all. The first thing you should do is, as soon as you get your graduation, you complete your graduation, get a job. If the job is not a mandatory requirement, agree with your parents. If they say, okay, I'm looking for a boy or for you, give consent. The other day I dealt with some 4 girls. They are not wanting to get married. They're all 20, 21, 22. They're not getting, and their mothers are not saying, no, you know, in Kannada, whatever she wants to decide, let her decide, you know. So anyway, I share all my concerns as an elderly person.
Yeah. It's a concern, because anytime there is a sudden change, the society seems like going through struggles. And it seems like everything is falling down. I'm sure it will settle down because our society has done well under these rules during the Vedic and early historic times. Our organic development was actually stopped with invasions from 12th century onwards. But probably, we will have our independence, we'll have our organic growth, and we'll have our change, and we'll stabilize because we have done well in the classical society. So there is hope. That's what I'm trying to say. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. So it's not all dark and gloomy. It might seem like that because it's a change, and sudden change might seem like everything is crumbling, but not so.
As a student from a college myself, who's 20-year-old, I just feel like we're no longer a cultural economy. We are an economic culture where money has become everything that rules us. And that is true for the decision makers of our society, who happen to be men. So women are basically at the mercy of men today because we do not understand the feminine divine anymore. So seeing women not wanting to marry at an early age, I think stems from that very issue, that financial independence often becomes the metric to make decisions for your own life and that of the family, which should naturally be something that she should have agency for by virtue of being the one who is the very basis of that expansion. However, Lavanya ji, my question to you would be that oftentimes when we talk about such ideas, which I don't know, loosely maybe called feminism, we often find a lot of defensiveness coming from the men's side. They feel like it's an attack on them, which it isn't, because they are allies to, again, putting it into the Western jargon, they're allies to the movement of understanding female resilience and understanding the autonomy that they require while finding oneness within our society. So how can we use Mahabharata to understand the effectiveness of having men as allies who understand the refined idea that a woman has a contribution to the society that is different and significant in its own way?
I'm really happy to see young people here and happy to see you here to understand our classical understanding and classical understanding of women and men. Of course, contribution of women and men is different, and it has to go in tandem. It can't go, in opposite directions. What is happening now is it's actually pulling in opposite directions. That's what we have to stop. Our classical understanding of feminine is actually much more revolutionary than what we see now. The classical female understanding is much more revolutionary. But it also considers the different aspects of feminine, not just, seeing her as a sexual object. That's the reason I, discounted this application of labels, spouse goddess, wild goddess, or, I also discounted the application of Freudian theories because they don't show the all-round nature of the women. Indian classical understanding is based on all-round understanding of the women. Women are allies of men and their contribution is different, but they are also productive members of the society. In the classical society, you have seen Satyavati, you have seen Draupadi, you have seen all of them. They're all productive members of the society, not idle members of the society. They're not idle women. So we have to find our own way. Women have to be given freedom to choose what appeals to them. Women trained in all aspects of life. Of course, as we know, the marriage is conducted later in life. Yoga and all shastras and everything was available for women to learn. And once they learn, of course, it is their choice to choose to do what they want to do. And which is, of course, is always different. Women's understanding of life and contribution is different than men. How can we do it now? The modern society, of course, we have found ways of supporting women. Ways of supporting women actually comes from addressing and creating programs, women-centered programs. Women-centered programs in the sense, support for women's education, support for women's training in different fields, and support for Women's health is actually last on the list, even in Western society. Women's health is the most neglected aspect of medicine. So all these areas have to be enriched with the focus of supporting the women. And of course, women also are charged with supporting children. So any program that aims at supporting women should also include support for children. They are coming around to it gradually, but there should be more programs, child support programs, which would help women undertake her choice of journey, whatever that might be. That's what would enrich, that's what would help us. Of course, women and men can make their own decisions at home, but the society should be ready. The society should be able to support it. That comes in the modern society most from government support of women's programs. So women-focused programs are a must and very important also.
I just want you to expand on it a little bit again on the talk about marriageable age being increased to 21. You did say that our society for the longest time worked pretty well under that. And I could be wrong on this, but I think I had read somewhere that 25 is the age where the brahmacharya of a student can be broken to enter into the marital life and then undergo other processes that go within it. So talking about that, I just wanted to know that is revivalism of the institutes that are made by men and women together, like that of marriage, when we talk about that revivalism from our Vedic history, are we talking about simply copying and pasting it, which I feel would be anachronistic, or are we talking about taking, inspiration from that and then changing it and innovating it into our own way, such that the essence is not lost? Because I feel like there's a very famous quote that goes on that if you copy and paste things from the past without understanding that there needs to be tweaks to be able to cater to the present times, then the practice does not just become anachronistic, but it becomes an anathema. So what would you say about that?
Okay, that's a good question. The thing is, in life we can only go forward. Same thing with society also. We can only go forward. We cannot go back. So anything we are bringing back, we're trying to understand, is a step towards the future, not towards the backwardness or going back. So when we say the 4 stages of life, traditional understanding of human life is 100 years and 25 for each stage. But that is really a flexible timeline. There are 4 stages. Of course, sometimes it is longer and it is shorter. What if somebody is so precocious and they complete their education by 20, right? They get married anyway. And what if somebody is so successful and want to retire at 45? That's possible too. So these timelines are flexible. We are only understanding the concept. We're trying to bring back the concept of giving time to the child to develop fully before marrying and before undertaking the responsibilities. Once the child is fully developed, the child's mind and body is fully developed. You're right in saying 25 because humans still grow until 24. Many people still grow taller and grow their mind. The frontal lobe still keeps growing until 24. So marrying before full growth is not advisable. It's good to complete the education, but somebody is precocious and completes the education by 20, of course they're ready. It depends on each person's development and choice. But we should have this understanding of, it's okay. It's okay to marry after 24, it's okay to marry after 21. But it's not advisable to marry before that. Is that going to stop anything? No, there is always going to be some fallout, as our educated members have mentioned. There are teenage pregnancies. So things happen. There is always fallout, but it's important to have a good advice, right? Advisable role and a rule. rather than not have any rule. If you don't have any rule, if you don't have any understanding of, 4 stages of life, what is it going to be? You're just leading your life in the darkness. Is it better to have some concept, a good concept that actually worked well in the past, or not have any concept and lead your life in the darkness? Let's see what happens. I'll just retire whenever, marry whenever. That's going to help? No, it's going to have a broader understanding of life. So these are, ideas for a broader understanding to lead a fruitful, successful life. Sometimes there may be accidents, sometimes there may be issues, but it's better to have a positive and time-proven idea of life rather than not have any idea of life. So I see it as a good idea of life, having these 4 stages of life in mind. That helps one have a positive aspect of life and plan for things in life. Somebody would know when they are 20 or 15 years of age, they would know that I have 10 more years to study, 10 more years to develop my career, rather than not know anything. When somebody is 40, they know, oh, of course, I have 10 more years to work and prove myself. Then I can retire, right? So it gives an idea of life on, how one can lead the life. So it's good to have something rather than nothing. So it's useful for men, useful for women. Of course, sometimes it may be late. For example, Satyavati actually took her sannyasa very late in life after meeting her grandsons. She did not take sannyasa early like everybody else. And others, Madhavi took sannyasa early on. And of course, some of them took, as soon as they were born. Her son Vyasa took sannyasa as soon as he was born. So there are different lives. Not all lives are same. Each life is unique. But it's important to have a concept and have a concept that actually proved and worked well.
I'm a very strong advocate of one thing, which I've experienced in my profession as a teacher. I'm an ex-Air Force guy, but after this thing, I started teaching in a management institute. So a couple of occasions where I was very successful in getting youngsters who got attracted to each other and getting them married, and then advising them to continue with their education and directing them to some counselors so as to plan their families. Initially, they were very apprehensive, and even the parents were not very supportive. But later, when we talked, then they married and they completed their studies. Life was good. So I feel, this economic aspect this young lady brought out, education, employment, economic independence, that's going against nature. You're fighting within yourself to achieve that goal against nature. So I very strongly, I request you, I think you're in the West, if I'm not, yeah, okay. I don't know whether it influenced your thinking or you're still, with the Indian thought, this thing. I feel whether Gandhi got married, when they went abroad, those days families, they said, insisted that before you go to abroad, you get married. Most of Savarkar got married. So I feel the elders like us, thinkers, thought leaders like you, must encourage, instead of, talking about living in relations, if there can be living in relations, the same relation can be accomplished within a marriage minus progeny. This is how I looked at it. I just sharing my thoughts with you.
All right, that's your opinion. So, but I don't advise child marriages. I don't advise marriage like Gandhi or Savarkar in 21st century. No, we can't go back to child marriages.
I am not advocating child marriage. 18 is the year now. Okay, you don't wait up to 25, 26, 28, 29. I'm saying you're in the, say, final year degree, or you're just started your CA or MBA or something like that. But that's plenty of time for you to fall in love. And that's the time, if such a thing happens, instead of living in, marry. And live in marriage life. So society, no tension, no complex, no problem. Counselor will counsel you to postpone your childbirth. If there is an accidental pregnancy, parents from either side, they take care of you, the child. This is how I look at it. Win-win situation for everyone.
Well, like Sir said, we should not go against nature, because nature can be a ruthless teacher after Prakriti is a woman too. Thank you very much, Lavanya ji. That was a very, very, very insightful talk. And your book will be linked onto our description when this premieres onto our YouTube channel. Again, thank you very much. And we wish to have more talks like this with you. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you so much.